Hey everyone, it's Dr. Lynch, and I'm sending you this level 3 video message from a parking lot in the mountains, in the Adirondack Mountains, in upstate New York. And I wanted to take a few minutes to share some feedback in terms of level 3. The main text you remember for that we had the interview around computer science as linguistic. It was an interview with me and Dr. Ian O'Byrne, and then we had the algorithms video, and then we also had a shorter text from James G around video games and literacy. And I have to say, I continue to just be really, really impressed with the quality of the posts that's coming out of this class, and it's pretty much across the board. After the first week or two, once people kind of figured out and kind of went back to the rubrics and whatever, like the quality of the posts have been really great. And what makes them quality is that they're specific, they're responding to the actual the like videos, but then they're also including connections to your own experiences across texts, and also often posing new questions. And so all of that's like just great. There was a few patterns in terms of some of the things that were shared, and I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about those. One is that when it comes to computer science in classrooms, I think overall folks are like, wow, I didn't know about that, or I never thought about it that way. Most of you aren't super comfortable with things like with coding and stuff. Some of you are. But overall, the idea was like, yeah, it's a language, and it's a language of power and creativity, and we got to teach our students, how to understand the way these languages work. But then by and large, there was this like kind of roadblock where it was like, well, but I don't know how to do that in my classroom, and I can't really afford the time to do that in the scope and sequence of things. And I get that. But what I ended up saying over and over again too was like, look, teaching's a creative art, all right? And in a lot of you are coming out of your first years, and so you're still figuring out like what this looks and feels like, and sometimes it seems that like teaching is, whatever I'm told to teach, whatever's in the scope and sequence, and whatever the tests are on, like that's my job, and whatever Danielson says, etc. And like, again, and I've said this in other videos, like that's part of it, all right? But there's a creativity to it, and the limits of your own pedagogy are just based on your own kind of openness to being creative about it. So, for example, there's a programming language that's provided by MIT called Scratch. Just Google Scratch MIT right now. Take a moment, pause the video, Google it, and you'll see there's like this huge community online around learning to code. And it's a visual-based program. You've got kids as young as elementary school using Scratch to create lots of things, including animations. Now, animations is something I'm focusing on, and I focused on in my comments, because you can make a simple animation using some basic coding. You can make an animation for anything, right? So there's no reason in, let's say, a unit where you might have students doing group work to prepare for an exam, right? So we're acknowledging the reality of the exams, etc. There's no reason you couldn't say to one of the groups to start, hey, can you go to this website, Scratch, it's called Scratch. Here's a computer, if you guys have access to them. And I want you to create an animation that explains to me how mitosis works. And I need you to be able to explain that to the class really clearly through an animation. Can you do that? And in doing so, you're taking the content of the class, and you're leveraging that as a way to learn a little more about coding. There's no reason you couldn't try that, even if it's just in a pilot case. And if you're at a school where you're like, I really don't know that I could do that. That sounds a little luxurious. Fine, grab a group of students and try it after school with them. All right, but what you're going to see is that if coding is in fact a language, then you can use that language to talk about whatever you want, including the content of your coursework already. These aren't mutually exclusive things. All right, so that's the first point, is around thinking a little bit more about the programming. In terms of algorithms, there were some really great insights around algorithms that I got very excited about. And one of them I think came from Ashton. And then later, Giuseppe had something similar where they were like, look, lesson plans are algorithmic. Mic drop, they're algorithms. If you look at a lesson plan, it's telling you do this and do this and if it's really detailed, it's going to give you even some of those breakdowns in terms of differentiation, which was Giuseppe's point. He's like, hey, when I'm teaching, the act of teaching and differentiating instruction is algorithmic. And I thought that that was like really, really smart. Like if, I'm looking at what students are doing right now, and I have this kind of like, there are different ways that I can help them. And if I see this, then I'm doing this. And if I see this, then I'm doing this. Like, it's true. It's algorithmic. Some of you were like, yeah, I know algorithms are important and I'd love to fold it into my class, but I'm really just not sure how to do so. Like, just make it simple. Like, put up a sign at the front of your room that just says, definition of an algorithm, blah, 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 blah. Anytime you hear or see something going on in class that's algorithmic, raise your hand and tell me. You'll be awarded extra points, right? So then you have a student who, like, one day when they're doing some experiment in class, all of a sudden you have a student raising a hand saying, look, I think the way we're going about this experiment is pretty algorithmic. Let me explain why. They explain it and they're right. You know what I'm saying? Like, just put up a sign and say, remind me that algorithms are important. And if you see one, tell me, right? If you see something, say something. So, again, we don't overthink some of this. If it's important, just be a little creative and inventive about it and be like, let me figure out how to make this part of the classroom culture, right? So I thought those were really interesting. I mean, there's also other ways you can get into algorithms in science class. Most of you are science teachers. The ways in which algorithms are used with like big data or in genetics research and all sorts of other things. Like, there's tons that you could explore there too, and you could do some Googling around to see, what articles might be out there. Newsela or Newsela is one that carries different kinds of articles and this sort of thing. So maybe you want to check that out for like nonfiction text that'll level the text for you and stuff like that. All right, finally, when it comes to video games, and most of you really liked the video game illiteracy video by James G, and that's not surprising because he's really smart and he's pretty awesome in a lot of ways. I think a lot of you liked it too because it was short and the other ones were pretty long, right? I warned you about that. That's why I kept the text down to 3 instead of 4 this week. But the video with G, I think, especially a bunch of you like play games and like consider yourselves gamers, and we're like, yeah, I never thought of it this way, but he's totally right. And there were 2 main kinds of feedback that I got with regard to this that I want to reference. Okay, so one is some of you were like, I love this idea that he's saying, but look, at the end of the day, like, he's talking about assessment and you wouldn't assess Halo using whatever, and the fact is I have Regents exams and like it's just not realistic. Okay, like, I get that. You got a lot of exam pressure, social studies. I mean, any of the subjects, but social studies and science are super content heavy. I understand that. But look, don't make an excuse either, okay? Like, there are ways to actually like experiment and play with different pedagogical approaches in your classroom, and the only inhibitor is you and your creativity. So for example, like, there's no reason in your classroom that you couldn't gamify a particular assignment. Like, so you could do it with homework. I mentioned a couple things I did with to a couple of you. I mentioned this project I'm doing with a school called Homework XP, where we've gamified homework assignments. I actually just put it up on my website today, so you can have access to it because I mentioned it was coming. You should go check that out if you want to. But it's like, think of how I gamified the course. It's like most of the content in this course is the same as what you get in a traditional course. Like, the same thing. The only difference is that in this case, I'm like, everyone's starting from 0, and I'm calling these quests. They're activities, right? But I'm calling these quests. I'm telling you what it means to do a quest well. I'm giving you a rubric so you know if you've done it well. We have levels. Everyone earns points every week, and I give you frequent, meaningful feedback, I hope. Like, I give you frequent, meaningful feedback on how you're doing. Like, that's it. You could arrange your class that way without touching the curriculum and content hardly. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just an instructional approach. Think about that. Like, and if you haven't, or if you're not convinced, like, pause and think about it again. Like, if you look at this course, most of the content you're doing and the kinds of things that you're grappling with, like, it's the same thing you would get in a traditional course. And I gamified this course in one panicked afternoon, like, figured out like what are the different things that we need to do, like a game version of this course to make it a bit more fun and engaging, right? There's some other things too that you might consider when it comes to like the game piece in the classroom. Again, if it's something that interests you, there's no reason in your classroom that you couldn't create a project or assignment where you put it in the student's hands and you say, look, we're going to look at a few examples of some pretty awesome games and what makes a game a game. We'll look at some card games, some board games, we'll look at some video games, etc. I want you to work with 2 or 3 other students. You're each going to be assigned a really key concept or topic for our upcoming exam on whatever, global warming. And you guys have to develop a game that you can play with other members of the class to teach them about whatever it is, the topic is. Like, put it in their hands and see what they come up with. It could be absolutely fascinating to see what they come up with at first, right? So there's like gaming there's like the gamification of your curriculum or instruction, like kind of at a macro level. And then there's also just like putting the game piece in students' hands and seeing what they come up with. Like, make the problem the solution. Like, I don't know how to game my class. Let me make that the solution. Heck, I'm just going to ask students to game up this review and see what they do, right? The point, though, is that whenever you feel like you're hitting some barrier, like I can't do something that I think could be really rich for my students and for me in my own development, whenever you find yourselves doing that, like, stop, because it's not true. Like, there are always ways to experiment. There are always ways to innovate. There are always ways to get creative. And I'll tell you this, if you're at a school where you feel like I'm not able to do that, or like I'm really not able to do that at all, then you need to think about the kind of school that you're teaching in. Maybe it's not a good fit for you. Like, what you want to be in a place where you're encouraged to grow and to experiment. There are responsible ways to do that, and you need to make sure that you're doing so thoughtfully and intentionally, and you're differentiating instruction, and it's all in the service of students. All of that's true. All right. However, if you're in a place where you don't feel like you're growing, or you can even begin to think this way, then you should be doing some reflection on whether or not the school environment you're in is the best fit for you. And if you're not sure, you should email me, because I've got principals emailing me all the time, interested in just like, new teachers and who's doing what, who's interesting, etc. So you should let me know that. All right. So that's the gist, I think, of what I wanted to share around level 3. And we're going to be landing this course very shortly. And everyone's got you got your instructions for the final quests and for level 4. So you're doing that now, I would say, and we'll be done with this very, very soon. So I really want to make sure we stay in touch, though. So if you haven't connected with me online via social media, and you can check previous emails or the syllabus for that, like, connect with me. We don't lose touch. Like, you're at an exciting part of your careers where you're starting to figure out who you want to become as a teacher, and I want to be as much support to you as I possibly can in that journey. All right. So awesome. I'm going to turn off you guys. What you can't see in this video is like there's people. I'm in a supermarket parking lot, and there are like people walking by being like, what's he doing in there? And they're like stopping and staring. Maybe you've seen some of that. It's been kind of funny. All right. So sweet. Thanks for listening and watching. And I'm looking forward to concluding the course with you, and I'll see you online.